Hi, this is Timothy Trujillo, and welcome to my presentation on Polyvagal Theory and Hypnosis. I'd like to present some background information about this theory and implications and understanding now that we have of how this theory can explain some of the phenomena that we observe in hypnosis as actually biological processes that are taking place. But more importantly, I'd like to show you how I present this information to my clients in session as a foundation to help them understand how their system functions, and more importantly, how to both be aware of that functioning and to, as it were, take control or affect that functioning in order to create better well-being in their lives. So polyvagal theory was developed about 25 years ago by Dr. Stephen Porges, who was investigating how our system works and functions in the environments of threat and safety. And he was investigating what we refer to as the autonomic nervous system. Now, most of us are familiar with this term, autonomic nervous system, from our Stress Management 101 or any of our biological studies on stress management, immune systems, mind-body interactions. The ANS, as it's commonly referred to, is our sort of biological sentry system that either puts us in a place of activation in order to remove ourselves from a threat, or puts our system into a state of rest and recovery, or rest and restoration. And the old binary system of the ANS was based on the two terms called the sympathetic. The sympathetic is the activation, the response mechanism to a threat. The sympathetic system is what we commonly refer to as the fight or flight mechanism. And the old binary aspect, or second aspect of that, alternate, kind of like if you would a switch, a toggle switch, was the parasympathetic system. And the parasympathetic system was commonly referred to as the relaxation response. And that system is what supported rest, recovery, restoration, and even reproduction, often referred to as rest and digest, rest and restore. And that system of the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system has been regulated, or recognized it is largely regulated by a mechanism, a nerve network known as the vagus nerve. Now, the vagus nerve takes its name from ancient times. The old original great Dr. Galen referred to the vagus nerve as a nerve that came out of the brainstem and went down into the body and kind of wandered. Vagus comes from the same term that we know as vagabond, vagrant, traveler, or wanderer. And that was because the vagus nerve seemed to wander through the body and innervate different organs within the body, versus the sympathetic, which was along the spine and kind of activated in the central nervous system and in the brain system, to largely, as it were, allow us to survive risk. And within that system is a kind of surveillance or sentry system that all of our senses, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mouth, our sense of feeling, and that sense of feeling even as a kind of vibrational sensory system, kind of alerts us to a threat or a hazard in our environment. And this system is on call 24/7. It's well known that even when we sleep, we're paying attention to what's happening in our environment, just in case there is a threat that arises that calls us to action. Now, what gets very interesting about this was about 94 was first publicly presented. This information by Dr. Porges. that in fact that vagus nerve is not just one nerve gone a-wandering. In fact, that vagus nerve is two different nerve networks. And that is what gives us the term polyvagal or multiple vagal. So we're going to get into how these two different vagal systems developed and how they operate within the system of our continuous surveillance of our external and internal environment to secure our well-being. Now, Porges refers to this monitoring system as neuroception, which he refers to as below the level of cognitive perception. We might call this subconscious awareness. Porges refers to this neuroception as a precognitive factor and is best explained as that experience that we have when we, if you will, we get the willies. We feel our hair rise. We cannot intentionally do that. It just happens when our system is alerted to a potential threat. And it's really, really important to discriminate real threat and potential threat. Because in fact, our system many times loses the ability to differentiate between a real threat and a perceived threat. And that's when the surveillance system, the neuroceptive system, can become imbalanced and create disharmony, disorder, and disease in our life. So where we start with this, and I use the whiteboard here. This is my whiteboard in my consulting room. This is probably, I have all my tools and resources of my work, but this is probably the most important thing I use. And it's a tool that I think you'll be able to use as well if you have a whiteboard like this to present this information to your clients, because even though I live with an artist for now almost 40 years, and I'm surrounded with artwork, my creative drawing skills are somewhat rudimentary. That comes in handy for this. So we're going to draw a picture of a figure, and in this case I'm going to make this figure facing forward because that helps us to understand how this polyvagal system works. Let's give him a little bit of hair. We're not going to put a mouth on him yet because I want to wait to see. The mouth changes, and it's a very, very important character in our story. So let's go back to the original binary system of fight or flight or freeze or faint. These are called the 4 F's, our response to a threat. It's now known, of course, that fight or flight mechanism is this sort of like arousal, sympathetic, feet do your thing, take action, get out of harm's way system. We also now know that system, when dysregulated, can put us into a state of persistent threat that causes us to always feel as though there's something we need to run from. And in our culture, something that's very, very common, and we work with a lot in our profession, is individuals who experience anxiety or its wicked kin, panic. Again, from a real or perceived threat, we want to get out of the way. And when we have a perception, either from external cues or internal cues, that all is not well, that puts us in a place of sympathetic arousal. Now, Porges has used the terms for this. He calls this mobilization with fear. Pretty good for feet do your thing. So mobilization with fear is the sympathetic response. It turns out that that's not our first defensive response. Our first defensive response, if you've ever kind of been out in the wilds and you hear a sound off in the distance, what's the first thing we do? We immobilize. We freeze. And we freeze so that we can actually first eliminate extra sounds so that we can key in on what those signals are. And this response is in fact the first biological defensive mechanism that we have, is the freeze response. And that freeze response, well, we can go back to the unicellular background, see from a single-celled organism, how a single-celled organism, what it will at first do to protect itself, it will become invisible. And how does it become invisible? By non-movement. So by non-movement, if we don't move under surveillance, we may not be seen. And this is mediated by, it comes out of the brainstem here, and it drops down the back of the body. And this, because the back of the body is called the dorsal area of the body, this is called the dorsal vagus nerve, or dorsal vagal network. Porges, and again we call this mobilization, and this is immobilization. Okay? Now, if we freeze, and that doesn't do the trick, then there are some creatures that have taught us the next thing. If freezing doesn't work, fake death, feigned death. So the feigned death response is also known as the feint response. This is also something we're familiar with called playing possum. There's a little snake called the puff adder, the hognose snake, and he has an interesting behavioral pattern that if he's threatened, he first will puff up and flatten his neck and look like a little cobra to kind of intimidate his threat, whatever that threat is. And that is a little bit of a mobilization, see there. But then if that threat continues, that snake will fall down and actually roll on its back like it's dead. And if you roll that snake over on its stomach, it will roll back on its back again. It's really, it's got a good idea, but I think it needs maybe a little bit more training on how to maintain the immobilization over time. But this immobilization, also in our lives, we can't always freeze, we can't always faint, we can't always withdraw. So we may withdraw by simply pulling in our feelers, becoming desensitized. And this in our society is what is known more as depression or depressive states. And we can actually see, and what psychologists are now saying, is that panic and anxiety and depression are on the same continuum. They are different grades of a perceived threat, a real or perceived threat, and the ability to mobilize or immobilize in response to that threat. There's a very, very, very interesting artifact of this dorsal vagal response, and that is that in the dorsal vagal response, there's another factor that, and it's a protection mechanism, that our feeling is turned off a little bit. We have natural anesthesia during a dorsal vagal response. And that's one of the really interesting correlates in hypnosis. One of the first sort of discoveries of, before hypnosis, even mesmerism, was that while entering this passive state, which we call trance, we now know that it is a dorsal vagal response, and that this response is also what is sometimes called animal hypnosis or tonic immobility. If you place an animal on its back, it will yield and relax out and enter a passive state. That's why recliners are so good for hypnosis, because we put the individual on their back, we put them into a tonic immobility state, and that facilitates this dorsal vagal response. Now we have the dorsal vagal response, immobilization, and in these cases, these are related to fear states. Response within a state of fear. So Porges would call this immobilization with fear and mobilization with fear. Get out of harm's way or freeze, faint, disappear, don't be seen, don't move, don't do a thing, or flee, and if you can't flee, fight and then flee. Take action. All right? Now, it turns out that along our developmental path, we found another way to deal with a threat. And that is to talk our way out of it, to negotiate, to find terms. And this, it turns out, comes from a completely different network. It still comes out of the brainstem, but instead of coming out of the back of the brainstem, it comes out of the front of the brainstem and moves into the chest. Now, while the dorsal vagal system innervates the gut, all digestion, reproduction, all of our gut mechanism, the ventral vagal, maybe I put that a little too high, the ventral vagal goes to our heart. And actually, it's funny, it goes to our heart and our face. Yeah, that's why I said I didn't want to draw the mouth on there, because until we got to the part of the story where when we're in a state of ventral vagal, we're in a state of what is called the social engagement system. The social engagement system is the holy grail. From psychological terms, everything is about this social engagement. Ventral vagal. And it turns out that the nerves of the heart and the nerves of the face, particularly the certain nerves of the face, right here, what we might call our mask to the world, and our smiley mouth mechanism, and oddly enough, our tongue, our throat, our voice mechanism, these are all part of ventral vagal, really seriously talking our way through a challenge. So this ventral vagal system is kind of interesting also in terms of hypnosis. Because what do we know about hypnosis? We know about hypnosis that the most important thing for us to do is to appropriately, within a sense of security, engage with our clients, which we call rapport. And we can now see that rapport, which is the foundation of effective hypnotic intervention, is also the holy grail of all psychological well-being from this polyvagal perspective. Now we have the three systems. We have the dorsal vagal immobilization with fear. We have the sympathetic mobilization with fear. And we have the ventral vagal social engagement system. It turns out that these systems can also be what are called a hybrid state, so that we may have a dorsal vagal state with social engagement. This is a sort of freeze, faint, calm state with a sense of engaged security. This is called immobilization without fear. This is the fundamental state that we induce through our hypnotic work. We can, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, we can actually, by engaging this immobilization without fear, this social engagement system and dorsal vagal system at the same time as inducing that deep hypnosis, I think that that's how we're able to facilitate a secure depth of dorsal vagal response that's often called the Esdale state or the hypnotic coma, where the organism is in a completely passive state, not an unconscious state. Remember, even in deep sleep, even in anesthesia, we are still consciously aware. But it is so safe and so secure that we can actually turn off our sentry system in a certain way. We are less concerned with what's happening in the environment because our sense of security is so profound. And this is this immobilization without fear, socially engaged relaxation response. At the same time, we might also have a mobilization sympathetic response along with a social engagement this is what we call friendly competition. Was another term for that. But whenever we are activated, but we're activated in a good way. And in stress management, we might call this a eustress response rather than a distress response. And it turns out that hypnotically, we do that as well, especially if we've worked with athletes, performers, that we commonly put them into an activation state. I have, with my weight loss clients, been able to induce a sweat with, or facilitate the client inducing a sweat just through the visualization and the engagement of doing some activity in hypnosis. We can actually drive that system. We're driving it in a very positive way. We're creating this activation, and we're doing it in this, again, it's a hybrid state of the sympathetic arousal with social engagement, or what is called mobilization without fear. Now, that's the cursory overview of this. And when our clients come in, they're usually coming in because of one of these two issues. They've either got depressive states, withdrawal, or it's just so common. This is such a big aspect in our work, is they're experiencing anxiety. And I simplify this, actually. I simplify this to a kind of yin-yang model. I know we're getting binary there, but in the yin-yang model, we can understand a sort of balance in this. And in this case, yang is nature. The simplest explanations or terms, phrases around yin and yang is that yang is stirring and yin is stillness. Now, a great way to explain this is that yang wants to go up. Yang is like energy that wants to rise. And a perfect example of this is the balloon, especially the balloon that we purchase at the fair. And what do we do when we purchase this little balloon at the fair? What's the first thing that we do with that balloon? We tie that balloon to the kid's wrist. And why do we do that? So we won't have crying later. We want to secure that balloon here so that the balloon won't float away. Balloon floats away, that's too much yang rising. What is yin? Yin is stillness. Yin is stability. Yin is like water. Water's nature is to flow downward. So yin is all of this gathering. If there's too much yin, if there's too much withdrawal, if there's too much passivity, we're going to get more into this dorsal vagal depressive state. What we want to do is we want to maintain a harmonious existence here between the yin downward flow and the yang upward flow. And here's something really cool, because we already have this in our hypnotic work. It's a very common test. I haven't used this in a while, but I want to come back to this because books and balloons, common suggestibility test. But we have it right there. We have the sense of weightedness of the books, and we have the sense of loftiness of the balloon. And even though we're doing these as counter perceptions, we can then bridge that test into a hypnotic model to allow that person, okay, you feel the weight of the books that kind of hold down, the kind of ballast and anchor, and you have here the balloon that kind of lifts. And in the middle, we just kind of float comfortably. We find that balance in there. So this is a way that clients completely understand how this works and how our mechanism or our objective is ultimately to come into this balanced, dynamic state and just kind of float our books down the street. Now, this all seems pretty cool, and it's pretty remarkable how it keeps our whole system in function. And we can get into some of the other divisions of imbalances here. Persistent anxiety states, these are going to create, some cardiovascular issues by maintaining the chemistry of anxiety and action. That's kind of back in the 70s when we had our hot rods and really dragging main, and we did all those things. We used to love to do this thing called a power stall to show off, where we would keep our foot on the brake and throttle that car so they would just start and then take off. And in many ways, this is a little bit like what our system is doing. It's kind of in a power stall where we got the brake on, but we're also powering at the same time, and we can see that just really burns the system up. So we want to learn how to, what do they teach us in driver's ed? The little egg is under the accelerator, press gently, and when you go to press the brake, press gently to keep that system in a more of a balanced state, the automotive in a balanced state. Now I'll go back again to our first thing, the autonomic nervous system. The thing about the autonomic nervous system is that autonomic was sort of like, well, these things are automatic. They happen without our direct conscious control. They control such things as our heart rate. Who here can, well, that's a loaded question. Who can control their heart rate? Because we know we can. The yogis have been teaching us this for thousands of years. We can control our heart rate. We can control the constriction or dilation of our blood vessels. We can control our digestion. We can control all of these states, because it turns out that one of the other things that the autonomic nervous system controls is our rate of respiration. When we're in a sympathetic state, respiration is a little more active, more rapid breathing. We're cycling, we're moving, we're mobilized, we're breathing faster. When we're in a ventral state or a vagal state, we breathe more slowly. But as it turns out, that is something that we can take direct control of. By slowing down our breathing, and we've known this for years, by simply slowing down our breathing, we can slow down our system. We can enter into a vagal, restive, relaxation response state. Same thing is true by speeding it up. And trust me, I've had this experience where I've been out in the cold and needed to warm up. And I just found if I started doing fast breathing, my system really started cooking and I warmed up fast. This is a yogic breathing technique to move a lot of energy through the body. But it's even simpler than that, because it turns out that every single breath that we experience is connected to and involved with this entire system. It turns out that when we inhale, what happens? We inhale, we receive breath. We inhale, we receive energy. We inhale, we activate our system. We inhale, we receive yang. We inflate the balloon. And that inhalation does in fact activate our sympathetic system. And when it does, our heart rate actually increases just a little bit. You can guess what comes next. When we exhale, we activate our vagal system, and our heart rate slows down just a little bit. Now, this difference between the rate of our heart on inhalation and the rate of our heart on exhalation is now a very, very important measure of our general health, well-being, and in some cases, our longevity. This is called heart rate variability. It's a very important measure now to assess the state of function and balance within the organism. That each time we exhale, the organism slows down a little bit. The heart rate slows down a bit. The blood vessels relax a little bit. So if there's some direct way for us to take control to bring this system down, That is the power. And in fact, what I learned a few years ago was that they were installing little stimulators into the neck that would stimulate this vagus nerve. And when they stimulated that vagus nerve, something really, really curious happened. Remember this about that dorsal vagal response and the anesthesia property of that? When we exhale, when we activate that vagus system, our pain levels actually go down. People with fibromyalgia reported complete liberation from their pain. So we turn down inflammation. It turns out that the key to our whole medicine chest is simply exhaling. Now, it's funny, I've been teaching some programs a couple of years ago. I taught a program to nurses on how they could use hypnotic language in their work environment to facilitate better outcomes. And when I was talking to one of the nurses that I was polling about, how she might use this method, she said, I just want to, come in and help everybody to be calm. I just want to walk in and say, okay, everybody take a deep breath. And I said, wait. Let's reverse that. Everybody just exhale. In fact, I learned years ago, because the first year of my practice, about half of my clients were coming in with anxiety. And I heard a common report from them. They would say, I felt like I was going to die. I felt like I couldn't get any air into my lungs. I couldn't catch my breath. And the more I started hearing this, they were like, I had to pull over on the freeway. I thought I was going to crash and die. I started realizing, there's something they're not doing. They're not exhaling. If they will simply exhale, they don't have to think about the inhalation. What happens when we get in a state of panic or anxiety? What are we doing? We're jacking that system more and more and more. So all we really need to do is simply exhale. That's how we take our power. That's how we activate our vagus system. That's how we calm everything down. So that's where I start with my clients. And it's a beautiful way to give them power in every circumstance that they carry with them spot on. Well, I mean, if that's all I did for my clients, I would be doing a great service to them. But we now know that we can start there. We can start with the exhalation and then give them awareness of how their system is working. And from that, also then bring them from this deep exhalation, trance depth state into an inhalation awakening state. And the beautiful thing, again, from a hypnotic perspective, is that while this system was all developed by Porges around the sense of safety in the environment of threat, what we're able to do, because mostly when clients come in, they're in a state of dysregulation. As I said, the throttle's been stuck or the brake is on. And when we employ this social engagement system, we're able to bring them into what Porges calls co-regulation, because our own calmer state facilitates a calmer state within them. So that our ultimate objective is through co-regulation to condition and pattern them and give them resources to experience self-regulation. Now, in our work, people come in and they've had traumas. This is why polyvagal theory has become so popular now, because it's seen as a very, very valuable tool in managing trauma. So when people come in trauma, they're in this high, persistent, sympathetic state, and we start to bring them down a little bit. Calm them down. That's what we want to do. We want to bring them out of this state. But there's something really, really important. And this goes along with the kind of trauma recovery and my training with Gil Boyne, where there's a big conversation of, do we do it regression? What if we get into abreaction? What if we bring that client into a panic state again? We can bring the client through this panic, through all of the feelings that they're having of threat and panic while in a socially engaged state, to help tonify or mollify, probably more appropriately, to bring that system more into balance so that our clients can know, yes, they can become activated. Yes, they can become mobilized with fear, but they can move through that. And when they move through it, they can come back into this restive state. And so think about how you can use these divisions of the dorsal vagal, immobilization with fear, the ventral, the sympathetic mobilization with fear, bringing it down into immobilization without fear through social engagement, or immobilization without fear through social engagement. And this is the more in-depth, intricate work that we do here. But let's just practice now what I do with a client. Because what have I said? Let's go back to what I said. You can take control of this whole system simply through the control of your breath. The life is in the breath. And the quality of the breath will determine the manner and quality of the life. So where you are, I'm going to sit back too. Let's just be present. And let's just sit back for a moment and observe our breath. Now, who was it wrote the great lyric, "Seeing is easy with eyes closed"? So observation is multisensory. And so one of the best ways for us to help our clients turn their observation inwardly is to simply close the eyes. So sit back, relax wherever you are, or you can stay seated upright, whatever's most comfortable for you. And go ahead and just close your eyes. And with your eyes closed, simply observe the pattern of your breathing. Observe the breath as it enters your lungs. Observe the breath as it exits your lungs. As you do, now focus your attention on the exhalation. Turns out it's true. Every time we exhale, we naturally relax. We activate the relaxation system through exhalation. So each time you exhale, allow yourself to relax a little bit more and a little bit more. Soon you'll notice that as you exhale, you feel the focus and responsiveness of your body moving into the lower part of your body, perhaps your lower abdomen, your legs, your feet. Tune into that and allow each exhalation to cause you to feel more settled, more relaxed, and more grounded, more stable, more at ease. Now, as you continue to drift into this deep relaxation state, allow all the sounds around you to also cause you to feel not only relaxed and at ease, but also engaged in that environment. The light, sound, perhaps aromas. Let your entire environment serve your well-being now. And allow yourself to just continue to drift deeper relaxed. Deeper relaxed. With each exhalation, make no effort to inhale. Allow the breath to simply flow in. And allow each exhalation to be purposeful, intentional, and fruitful in allowing you to settle, settle, settle. And in this relaxed state now, you may find that your thoughts become a little more clear, that your body feels a little more restive, that you may begin to think about goals or objectives or needs that you have in your life, that you might begin to observe connections, actions, relationships, to facilitate and realize those goals or objectives in your life. It's well known that when we're in this relaxed state, our thinking is in a broader perspective. All of our associations, all of our planning, all of our long-term function and success is more highly activated. And then as you're ready, and take your time, begin to focus on your inhalations. When you focus on your inhalation, feel the energy move to the upper part of your body, perhaps your shoulders, forehead, or crown. And now allow each inhalation to begin to stir you into a state of wakefulness, again engaged in the environment. And let each breath, as you begin to awaken and engage, to activate in a wonderful, productive way. Take your time. Take a nice deep breath as you're ready. Allow your eyes to open and emerge, feeling refreshed and yet invigorated at the same time. And as you can see, we've done a complete hypnotic process here, simply through using the breath, emphasis on exhalation, and then arousal or awakening through inhalation to bring back to a wakeful state. We've incorporated all of these mechanisms: dorsal vagal response, ventral vagal response, even the sympathetic response, but we've done it with safety. Speaking of safety, that's my timer. And we got it all covered. So thank you so much for your time on this, and I hope this information is helpful. If you have any more questions, contact me. My website is timothytrujillo.com. This information will also be in my handouts, and I'm searchable. I'd be happy to answer any further questions through the active chat here, or contact me later on for more information on this. I thank you. I appreciate you. Go out there, use this work, and help the people. Have a great